Okay, so have you ever, like, when you hear about an earthquake on the news
Hmm.
and it's like, maybe across the world or even just a few states over,
Yeah.
and you're like, oh, wow, that's crazy. But then, like, you kind of just move on with your day.
Right.
It's like out of sight, out of mind. But then when it's closer to home, and especially when it's close enough to where you are that you feel it,
Oh, yeah.
like you feel the aftershocks, that's a whole different ballgame.
Totally. You definitely pay more attention when it's closer to home. And that's what makes this recent earthquake in Ethiopia so kind of significant.
Yeah, definitely.
On October 6th of this year, 2024, a 4.9 magnitude earthquake. It struck near Mount Fentail,
Okay.
and that's just southeast of Addis Ababa.
Yeah, and the Essential Dialogues podcast, they zeroed in on this, especially for like folks living in Addis Ababa. So that's what we're going to deep dive into today.
Yeah, let's get into it.
What's interesting to me is that, like, yeah, there wasn't this widespread damage, but it seems like this earthquake was a bit of a wake-up call.
I think that's a really good way to put it. It's a wake-up call.
Mhm.
It reminds us that Addis Ababa is in a seismically active region, and, that preparation for earthquakes is absolutely critical.
Yeah.
You can't just assume it's not going to happen.
It's easy to just breathe a sigh of relief when you hear, okay, no major damage, but it sounds like what you're saying is we shouldn't just dismiss this whole thing, right?
You don't want to just brush it off. And this event, I think, it really highlights some of the unique vulnerabilities that a city like Addis Ababa faces,
Mhm.
especially with, experiencing this rapid urbanization.
Right.
More and more people are living in multi-story buildings, high rises.
Yeah.
And when you have that kind of concentration of population, the integrity of those structures, how well they hold up under stress, under the stress of an earthquake, becomes so important.
Yeah. And honestly, that's like a scary thought to me. I mean, I can only imagine feeling tremors, but like being on like the 10th floor of a building, I mean, it really makes you think about building codes. Like, are the codes there? How are they being enforced?
Exactly. And are they robust enough to actually withstand future earthquakes?
Yeah.
Which are, let's face it, they're not a matter of if, but
Mm.
when.
Right.
And, one thing that Addis Ababa could consider is looking at the examples of cities like, say, San Francisco, a city that has a very long history with seismic activity.
Yeah.
They've adopted very stringent building codes, retrofitting programs, and those are the kinds of lessons that, other cities can learn from.
Absolutely. You've got to kind of learn from those who have been there, unfortunately.
Right.
And it's not just the buildings themselves, though. I mean, you've got to have a prepared population, right?
Absolutely. And this is something that the Essential Dialogues episode really underscored the need for public awareness, public education,
Yeah.
preparedness.
Yeah.
You'd be surprised how many people just don't know what to do during an earthquake.
It's one of those things that you don't really think about until it's happening, and then it's like, oh no, what do I do?
Exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly. And there are a lot of misconceptions out there. For instance, a lot of people think, oh, I should stand in a doorway. That's the safest place to be.
Right.
But in reality, that's not always the case. Sometimes it's much safer to drop, cover, and hold on under a sturdy piece of furniture.
Wow. See, I didn't even know that. So it's not just knowing what to do during, but it's also what happens after, right? Like what happens if there is damage to essential infrastructure? Like, how do you even begin to recover from that?
That's a great point. And that gets into the whole concept of resilience, right?
Yeah.
Because Addis Ababa is a city that is constantly growing. It's expanding its infrastructure.
Yeah.
Roads, bridges, power lines, all of these things. And all of these are potentially vulnerable in a major earthquake. I mean, a stronger quake, it could knock out power to the city, knock out water. And then the question becomes, how long can a city of that size cope without those essential services?
It's like you start to think about these things and you're like, I just didn't even consider that, but it makes you realize how like vital those that infrastructure is. And beyond the physical, though, there's like a psychological impact too. Even if like your building is fine, just that experience of like the ground moving beneath you.
Oh, absolutely.
That's got to stay with you.
It does. And that's why transparent communication from city officials is so important after an earthquake. Making sure that people have access to resources, whether that's mental health services, community support groups, things like that. Addressing that psychological impact, I think, is a key part of building trust within a community and helping people feel safe and secure.
It sounds like we're saying that this earthquake, while it wasn't like catastrophic, it feels like it was a real opportunity for Addis Ababa, like, to learn, to strengthen its preparedness for the future.
Absolutely. It's a chance to reevaluate those building codes,
Yeah.
to invest in more resilient infrastructure, make sure that public awareness campaigns are really hitting home, all of those things.
Yeah, and like they say, knowledge is power. And for anyone listening out there who has any kind of connection to Addis, or honestly, any earthquake-prone area, maybe take a moment, do a quick search online, look up earthquake safety protocols, because you just never know. That information, as basic as it might seem, could be life-saving.
Exactly. Share it with your friends, share it with your family. It only takes a few minutes, but it can make a world of difference.
For sure. A little awareness can go a really long way. And this whole conversation, it just makes me think about cities like Addis Ababa experiencing this rapid growth. How do they balance that progress with, like, the very real need for earthquake preparedness? It feels like a tough thing to balance.
It is a tough thing to balance, and it's a question I think every growing city in an earthquake-prone region grapples with. And I think this recent event, it underscores just how significant that question is. Because finding that balance, it's an ongoing process. It demands a commitment to safety, a commitment to resilience at every level,
Yeah.
individual, community, and government.
Yeah.
And that's really what it comes down to,
Yeah.
being prepared.
Absolutely.